Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. On today's video, we investigate some doppelganger horror stories. We have started a new podcast that combines multiple videos. If you prefer listening to longer videos, the link will be in the description. Now let's begin. My dad's doppelganger is back again. I learned that, in Resum, doppelganger, it's like a spiritual twin, or ghost clone of a person who is seen by other people. And usually after this, a random catastrophe will happen. My family has been witnessing this event for decades. Always some relative sees this spiritual clone of my father, mom, sister, friends, and now my uncle witness this paranormal event. I have a lot of these stories. I don't know how to tell, but I will try. Some decades ago, my mother saw my father enter our home and into one of the rooms. But when she went to check the room, my father was no longer there. My real father then arrived. Again through the door. My mother commented on why he had left, but he said that he had just arrived now. Another time during COVID, a friend saw my father sitting on a bench in a public square, but my dad was at a farm that day. During COVID, my father isolated himself on a farm taking care of my grandmother. The most recent appearance was some months ago. My uncle came to our house to pick up some packages. He saw my father sitting with his back to the window. My uncle through the window waved and talks, but my father was motionless. My uncle found it strange, so he just left. Well, at that moment, my real father was at the farm again. So what did my uncle see or greet that day? The fish story was insane after my grandfather died. Constant paranormal things happened on our farm. My grandmother, a cousin, and my father were alone on the farm one night in 2007. My father decided to go fishing. A few minutes later, my grandmother and cousin are alone, until my father arrives with a fish. He peels the fish, removing the scales with a knife, and gives the fish to my grandmother. After this, he disappears. A few minutes later, my real father arrives home again without any fish. My father was surprised. My grandmother holds a big fish in her hands. My dad asked, "Where did you find this fish, Mom?" She replied, "You gave it to me, son." My father and grandmother argued, but my father didn't believe it until he opens the back door and saw the remains of fish skin that had been removed. This story scares our family to this day. My father said that my cousin was there the whole time. I bought my first house in November 2019. As a kid who grew up dirt poor, obviously this was a huge accomplishment for myself and my family. We moved in, and for the first few months, it was our quiet little suburban house with a decent yard, and it was our slice of the American dream. At the start of the pandemic, I was furloughed from my job, so I was home for about a month. That's when my first experiences with sleep paralysis began. My girlfriend would typically be up an hour before me to take our daughter to daycare. I'd wake up, kiss them goodbye, and lay back down until my alarm went off. When I woke up one morning, I couldn't move. I could almost wiggle my fingers a little and move my eyes, but that was it. That's when I saw a little girl standing at the bottom of my bed out of the corners of my eyes. It looked like my daughter, even stood like she does, but the voice it had was warped and deeper somehow. It kept saying "Dada" over and over again. Each time the voice got deeper and almost seemed desperate for acknowledgement. I managed to break free of the paralysis and quickly sat up. She was gone. I kept telling myself it was just a dream, but the logical part of my brain knew better. Nothing else like that happened again until about a year later. Around Christmas of 2020, we always get a live tree instead of a fake tree at my girlfriend's insistence. It's a long-standing tradition in her family, and I'm vastly outnumbered if I chose to argue against it. I just hate vacuuming up those needles. I digress. The night after we set up and decorated the tree, I got up to grab some water from the fridge. My kitchen is separated from my living room with a wall about 4 feet high, with a support pillar on the right side. I open the fridge, grab a bottle of water, and close the door. As I turned to face the living room, that's when I saw her. A slumped-over figure of an older woman who was swaying back and forth. The swaying movements were rigid and almost mechanical. It looked like my mother, who had been passed away over a year ago at this point. Who or what was this thing, and why was it here all of a sudden? Despite me telling myself to run down the hallway and lock my bedroom door, part of me had to know if this was real. I've had vivid dreams after one too many edibles, but this wasn't like that. As I rounded the corner pillar, I came around the corner and the figure disappeared. Nothing. I stood in my living room looking around and trying to get my breathing under control. Cold terror had engulfed me at that point. I almost ran into my bedroom with a distinct certainty that I'd look back and find this thing running after me. The next morning, I told my girlfriend about it, and she immediately blamed the edibles. I thought she may be right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that that wasn't it. She has never experienced anything and is a staunch denier of the paranormal, so I knew trying to convince her this was real was a battle I had already lost. A few days later, my girlfriend had already left for work, but I was watching my daughter for the day. She normally gets up around 7:30 a.m., so I got myself up to shower at 6:45 a.m. As I'm drying off, I catch a figure walking down my hallway towards my daughter's room out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was my girlfriend and shrugged it off, but then I realized that she'd been gone for almost an hour at that point. She kissed me goodbye like she always does before leaving. Panic gripped me like it never had before. I ran to my daughter's room. I stopped at the door and heard her saying hi to her mommy. I opened the door, flipped on her light, to find my daughter still wrapped in her blanket sitting up. "Good morning, baby," I said with a thin smile. "Good morning, Daddy. Where'd Mommy go? What's wrong with her eyes?" Terrified, but still trying to keep my composure, I said, "Well, Mommy went to work before we woke up. She kissed me goodbye and left. Why do you think something was wrong with her eyes?" My 3-year-old scrunches her face, and what she said next still freezes my blood when I think about it. Shaking her head, she says, No, Daddy, Mommy was just here, but her eyes were gone." I said nothing, and as calmly as I could, I got her out of bed and to the other side of the house. What is this thing, and why is it just showing up now? I called my girlfriend a few hours later and talked to her about what had just happened. I put my little girl on the phone so she could tell her mother that I wasn't lying and asked her if her eyes were okay. Mostly silent and very apprehensive, she agreed that I should call a priest if it made me feel better. The next morning, I called my local Catholic church, because I'm no Darren, and asked if the parish priest could come and bless my home. I'm baptized Catholic. I'm very lapsed in practice, but I told the rectory secretary what was going on, and she immediately put me in touch with a priest outside of that particular parish who is known to deal with disturbances like my or worse. When he arrived, we talked more in depth about the things that had happened and how they started. Without any prompting, he walked to my daughter's room, threw holy water into the corner when her bed is. The priest told me that whatever this entity was, the way it was presenting itself was not only predatory, but likely demonic in nature. He added that doppelganger-type phenomenon, not always but sometimes used by a demonic spirit, to attempt to possess someone by withering down their ability to discern reality. I nodded in silent terror, and didn't want to tell him that I felt like I could die at that point. Since then, I haven't felt anything or seen anything out of the ordinary. The house just feels more vibrant and livelier. I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes, but chalk that up to paranoia to keep my sanity. I've worked for hotels in California for about 8 years now, and have had my fair share of paranormal experiences. But this one stood out pretty well, as it happened in broad daylight. I am one of the maintenance men of this hotel. It's a decent-sized mid-range style, pool in the middle, restaurant near the lobby. One day I was asked to change out a sensor on one of the automatic toilets in the women's restroom in the outside hallway by the pool. So I walk over with tools in hand and started the process, having to grab 1 or 2 extra tools during it. Once installed, there's a 10-minute cycle of it adjusting its sensor before use, so I end up waiting outside leaning on the rails. One of my co-workers, Luis, ends up walking into the men's restroom after saying hi to me and asking me what I was doing. By the way, the men's door is literally 5 feet from the women's door, That's the only way in and out of the restrooms where I'm leaning against. A moment later, another coworker, Jesus, walks by to use the men's restroom, then comes out a few minutes later. Now, my timer has just gone off. As I'm walking towards the women's restroom, I stop to ask Jesus if Luis was still in there, because I might need help taking the tools back. He tells me no one else was in there. I end up walking inside the men's room slowly and saw absolutely no trace of anyone else. I walk back out confused. Then across this hallway about 40 feet away, I see Luis walking towards me. I stop him and say, "Hey, when did you leave the bathroom?" He told me he didn't use that bathroom today and that it was his first time interacting with me that day. I still think about this experience often. Not sure what I saw. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.